The war in Russia, and yes, I wrote that correctly, continues. We will get to the wild map in a second, but I need to spoil the main point for today. The war is fast becoming unsustainable for average Russians, and it is all thanks to some early sanctioning decisions from the West finally having some bite against Moscow. Yep, today is an exciting exploration of the juxtaposition of MILFs and reinsurance policies, and I am proud to be certainly the first person to ever pair those two things together in the history of humanity. Plus, we will also try to understand why the Kremlin itself is not doing anything about it. My personal word achievements aside, the main campaign I am referring to, of course, is Ukraine's strikes on Wildberries distribution centers. And goodness, the Amazon of Russia is getting destroyed faster than the actual Amazon rainforest. Here is a map of internationally recognized Russia, with all of the sites destroyed, torched, or otherwise rendered unsafe. You will notice a concentration around Moscow for obvious reasons. I have one off of the map because it occurred in Crimea, and while they are still in the western third of the country, they are starting to drift eastward. Just this morning, you can add reports of 3 more, in Volgograd, Tatarstan, and a second time just across the Kerch Strait. Plus, it appears that Ukraine has struck a distribution center of Wildberries' chief rival, Ozon, which may have only previously been caught in the crosshairs of some neighboring Wildberries facilities. We have reached the point where Firepoint, the company best known as the producer of the Flamingo cruise missile, though their drones are responsible for these attacks, is playing a type of Wildberries bingo on social media. And yes, I meant that. Correctly guess the next target location, and you could win one of these Firepoint branded keychains. And if you are wondering why it is called MILFTECH, well, this being a family show about war, I can only assume that MILF stands for Missing Inventory Logistics Failing. Or it is because the CEO is a woman and she is mocking gender stereotypes about women in the defense industry. By the way, she was born in 1992, just in case older millennials need another reason to reevaluate what they have been doing for their entire lives. In any case, Firepoint is very pleased with the chaos that they have caused and are unafraid to use Russia's own recordings of the damage to further their social media presence. But as interesting as MILF-based social media is, the real story underpinning Russia's problems right now is insurance. Yep, boring old financial systems strike again. Businesses need insurance to hedge against the various risks that they encounter on a day-to-day basis. You might have a great business model that reliably turns a profit, but there is a small chance that something may go catastrophically wrong. Well, you would not want a single hiccup to ruin an otherwise reliable moneymaker, so you have insurance hedge against that rare but awful outcome. However, wars screw with the entire operation. The business model that insurance companies adopt is to pool risk. A fire at a factory, for example, is a rare event that would be devastating to that particular company in that particular location. But if an insurer covers 100 different factories, there is much less variance in the expected outcome, thanks to the joys of the central limit theorem. So it collects premiums from each of those companies, knowing that a handful will have fires. But that is okay. The premiums from each of the other companies more than cover the payouts, so the insurer can turn a profit each year. There are 2 major problems with this business model, though. One is bad luck. Despite the central limit theorem's tendency, there are still tails in the distribution where, through sheer awful luck, a ton of factories burn in a particular year. This problem gets solved through something called reinsurance. Because I heard you like insurance, so I got you insurance for your insurance, so you can insure while you insure. Each individual insurance company faces a low risk of bad luck, so the reinsurer pools that risk in the same manner that insurers pool risk for the original companies. It is the magic behind the insurance industry that none of us normies ever have to think about, because it all happens behind the scenes. But things start to break down without it, and you might not trust your insurance company's ability to pay you out if it did not exist. Moving on, the second problem with the first tier of insurance schemes is correlated risk. When most of the time 3% of factories have fires, the system works great. When 97% of the time there are no fires, and 3% of the time all of them have fires, everything breaks. Sure, the insurance company would be rolling in the cash that 97% of the time, but 3% of the time it would become insolvent. This is why insurance policies usually include force majeure clauses, most of which hedge against payments when the cause of the damage is correlated. It might seem like a trick that insurance companies use to cheat on their coverage, but it is actually a reflection of reality. Insurance companies literally cannot pay out everyone all at once. Customers should neither pay for that contingency nor have an expectation that they should receive that coverage. Perhaps you can see where this is going. Think about the correlation problem in the context of Ukrainian bombs. For insurance to work, knowing that my factory had a problem should tell us nothing about whether your factory had a problem. However, that is not how strategic bombing campaigns work. Knowing that your distribution hub was destroyed makes me think that mine is more likely destroyed. The knowledge that Ukraine is attacking these things at all makes everyone else uneasy. And to make matters worse, the more I see destroyed, the more likely mine is destroyed, because we are learning more about the extent of the bombing campaign. In turn, default insurance policies are no good here. It is not just a matter of higher risk of destruction. Insurance companies could at least resolve that problem with higher premiums. It is the correlation that is the problem. Now, there is still an insurance-based solution here. Charge those high premiums and then seek out a reinsurer. The reinsurer will then demand its own high premiums, but if they are insuring a lot of other insurers, they can absorb the correlated risk in one, so long as that correlated risk is not correlated with the other risks that they are assuming. That is where another problem arises specifically for Russia. There are not very many reinsurance companies in the world. The enterprise is enormously capital intensive if you want to credibly back your guarantees, and it just so happens that the best reinsurers are Western companies. So now you can see where the problem is. Russian companies began switching to Russian insurance following the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and basically had to cold turkey move to domestic companies after the 2022 invasion. Those insurance companies also had to switch to Russian reinsurers. But then we run into two further issues. One, Russian reinsurers are small, too small for the task at hand today. Second, and this is where things get wonky, reinsurers have their own reinsurance called retrocession. That is right, I got you insurance for your insurance for your insurance so that you can insure while you insure while you insure. Retrocession providers face the most risk, so they need to be even larger and hedge their bets by casting as wide of a net as possible. A hurricane in Florida and an earthquake in Taiwan are about as uncorrelated as it gets, so they can still have some peace of mind. And on a day where you can piece together this information and stay one step ahead of me at all times, I would guess that you can see the issue here. Russian reinsurers have no access to retrocession, precisely because it requires access to global markets. That leaves the insurer of last resort, the Russian state itself. And so far, Russian businesses are not hearing much from the government beyond thoughts and prayers. Even with natural disasters, governments routinely become the de facto insurance company when no actual business wants to touch the situation. They effectively socialize the cost of the bad outcomes to everyone in the country. In Russia's case, this would only be appropriate. 4 years ago, the Kremlin dictated that there would be a full-scale war in Ukraine. So when that war came back to Russia, the state as a whole should be on the hook for the damage. It does not make sense for a private company to shoulder the burden of war. But nope, the Kremlin does not see things like that. And the lack of serious help beyond promises of loans and tax breaks raises questions of what the Kremlin is thinking here, as every Russian involved in e-commerce is now internalizing the cost of war. My best guess to explain the lack of action is a combination of two factors. One, the Kremlin just cannot afford it. E-commerce covers about 8% of GDP if the destruction of Wildberries and the like also sinks their third-party sellers. And that is before other sectors enter the picture, like grocers who are considering downsizing their distribution centers to avoid this exact problem. The Kremlin does not have the liquidity to pay out that kind of damage. Well, not without printing an absurd amount of money, which Russian economists know is a bad idea for a host of other reasons. Remember, the Kremlin is feeling financially constrained right now with the loss of its refinery revenues. That is why there are rumors of Russia abandoning contract recruitment and switching to a 500,000-man mobilization in 2 months, because the latter option costs much, much less. And whatever liquid money Russia does have is instead staying in a vault to hedge against a contagion problem that could lead to systemic risk to the entire Russian financial system. The last time that we talked about Wildberries, the central conclusion was that the company does not present that type of problem given what is publicly known. In turn, the Kremlin can rest easy tonight, happy that it passed along another set of war costs to an unsuspecting victim. Or at least the policymakers behind those fortress walls can try to sleep well, so long as upset Russians do not begin marching on the streets. So what are our takeaway lines for today? Ukraine's Wildberries strikes continue and appear to be spreading to related targets. Russian insurance companies cannot handle the problem due to a combination of its scope and earlier Western economic sanctions. And the Kremlin, as of yet, cannot be bothered to address the problems, despite being the only entity that can at this point. Meanwhile, you can recall how this all got started by reading one of these 2 fantastic books that cover the origins of the war. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.